so much, Katya, and thank you so much to UNRIS for organizing this very timely conference on overcoming inequalities in a fractured world. And the inequalities get so stark by the day. In the opening page of my new book, Oneness versus the 1%, it has just come out in India and will be published in other countries as time goes. You might remember 2008 was the collapse of Wall Street, and tax money bailed it out. The billionaires got richer. So in 2010, 388 billionaires controlled as much wealth as the bottom half of humanity. This number came down to 177 in 2011, to 159 in 2012, to 92 in 2013, to 80 in 2014, 62 in 2016, and it shriveled to a mere 8 in 2017. This year it is 5. The 2016 March data was that the 6 richest had 343 billion, and by the next year they had 402 billion. And their money is then managed by the asset management funds, which did not exist before globalization. They were insignificant, but they are the determining factor in the economy today. The two biggest are Vanguard and BlackRock. We normally think of Wall Street and Goldman Sachs. They look like nothing today. They're very small players financially. So in 2008, Vanguard was less than $1 trillion and BlackRock was $1 trillion. 2012, Vanguard rose to 2.2 trillion, BlackRock was 3.3. When I started this book in after the Paris event, because that's the event that forced me to look at what was going on, Vanguard was 3 trillion. Within a year, by the time this went to the publisher and was published, within a year it was 4 trillion. Now how do the asset managers make $1 trillion a year? India's GDP is at 1.3 trillion. We are a land of 1.3 billion people. Very hard-working peasants, very hard-working women, and all of that work counts for nothing. But the speculation is growing by the day. I've been looking at, of course, I started to look at agriculture because of what happened, the fracturing of the most prosperous part of India, the state of Punjab. I did my MSc honors in physics from Punjab. And it was a peaceful land, the richest state and province of India. By 84, it had erupted in violence. And those days I was working for the United Nations University on a major program of conflicts over resources within peace and global transformation. And I said something's going on here that needs to be looked at, because when I was collecting data on conflicts over rivers, Punjab was the highest. But by June of 1984, the story was only about religion. The resources had disappeared, the rivers had disappeared, the farmers' incomes had disappeared. The farmers' blockade of June the 4th had disappeared, where they were saying, if we can't choose what we grow, if we can't decide how we'll grow it, if we can't determine the price at which it will sell, if we can't determine when the water of our own rivers will flow to our field, We are living under slavery. That was the way they were framing it. By June the 4th, the army was sent to the Golden Temple. And when I did the book, which became Violence of the Green Revolution, unrest had a very important role, because till that time everyone was saying, oh, high-yielding varieties, miracle, never again hunger. The reason the Green Revolution was called the Green Revolution was it was supposed to be an alternative to the red. You remember? There was a red revolution happening in the world at that time. And the promise given was through commerce and through the chemicals there'd be prosperity, and through the prosperity there'd be peace. And the Nobel Peace Prize was given for the Green Revolution to Norman Borlaug. But there wasn't peace in Punjab in 1984. And that's the question that I had in my mind. And it was a major UNRWA report which had said the new varieties bred for chemicals should not be called high-yielding varieties because they are not high-yielding in and of themselves. They are high-response varieties and should be called HRVs, not HYVs. And that is what opened up my mind so much, to look at the fact that as the soil was losing its fertility, as the monocultures and the chemicals were leading to a decline, and the withdrawal of subsidies on which the beginning was based was making the economy collapse. That's what made the farmers rise, because they were not high-yielding varieties. And it was in this building 31 years ago. I had been invited to a meeting that took place outside Geneva. It was a retreat with the agrochemical giants of that time, some of the UN agencies, and scientists and civil society members who had been looking. I had done the book on agriculture, but that was about my only expertise. But I was called, and I came to learn. And at that meeting, the agrochemical industry said we are too small. Now, those days, Ciba and Sandoz were sitting separately in that meeting. They merged a few years later to become Novartis. And they merged with AstraZeneca to become Syngenta. And now Syngenta has merged with ChemChina, and Monsanto has merged with Bayer, and Dow has merged with DuPont. But in fact, they're all owned by the asset management funds. I have a table at the end of this book on the largest shares now in these companies is not individual shareholders. It's the billionaires. And they decide whether GMOs will be pushed or not. They decide whether the new genetic engineering technologies, the gene drives, the gene editing will happen or not. They determine wherever there's a potential for power, control, and profits. Microsoft was not a very big player. Who are the biggest name? It used to be Gates for nearly 15 years as the richest. He lost the richest man's place to Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos did not exist 20 years ago. He said in an interview, it must have been in Financial Times, which I would have read while traveling, he said India got him to the top place. Because last year, the tax laws were changed. And I support Indian farmers who, we worked with them to save seeds, biodiversity, do organic farming, and their economic sovereignty of doing their own marketing. So the 20 farmers who've grown this pulse in this place or this rice in this place, what we facilitate is that there's a truck to bring it all together. And they used to sit in the truck and bring it to the market. And as long as they could prove that this is their produce with their land title, there was no taxation. And they could move. At least within the provinces, they could move freely. This year the truck wasn't allowed to move. And I did a quick calculation. What individual farmers would have to pay for farmers is all that Jeff Bezos pays for an entire state. He doesn't pay sales tax anyway. He doesn't pay, he's got storages, but he doesn't pay property tax. And I think these are issues worth investigating. Because not only are there tax avoidance, and a lot of the billionaires' money is in the tax havens, but they worked out brilliant ways of not paying taxes. So at that meeting of 87, the second thing that happened was, and they said, we can only make money now through selling GMOs, which didn't exist at that time. This is 1987. GMOs were commercialized in 92. They said, but we have to push GMOs because it's the only way we can claim patents on seed, and it's the royalty collections that will make our future profits. And then they said, but Europe and America are very small markets for agriculture. It's the third world. That's where the farmers are. That's where the royalties will come from. So we've got to have a global treaty. And it's in this building that I first heard the word GATT. I didn't even know there was something called GATT, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, which became the WTO, and the Trade-Related Intellectual Property Rights Agreement, which was being put into it. This is what a Monsanto representative said. Industry has identified a major problem for international trade. And what was the problem they had identified? That farmers save seeds. That was a big problem. That farmers save seeds and have seed sovereignty. So they went on to say, it crafted a solution, reduced it to a concrete proposal, and sold it to our own and other governments. The industries and traders of the world commerce have played simultaneously the role of patients, diagnosticians, and prescribing physicians. But I heard about the GATT and TRIPS, so I started to work on this. I started to come back to Geneva to work with our embassy to GATT and start telling them the issues of the seed. And we managed to change the draft that had been brought by industry with two exemptions. The first, it was going to be a requirement for every country to patent everything in all life forms. We managed to put in clause 27.3b of TRIPS an exclusion from patentability of plants and animals and essentially biological processes. In the case of seed, there was an attempt to put UPOV, which is the Breeders' Rights Treaty, and we put in there effective sui generis system that countries could write their own laws. So in India, we wrote a law, and I was invited by the government of that time to be part of the expert group, which actually has farmers' rights built into it. A recognition that farmers are breeders and have rights. And in terms of our patent law, we had to change it. It had to be amended. But we put in it Article 3J, which says plants, animals, seeds, and their parts cannot be patented because they're not human inventions. So we did a big biodiversity congress, and my colleagues said we really should consolidate everything we've done, put it together, all these different laws, the biodiversity law, the farmers' rights law, the patent law. And so there is another new book. It's called Origin. What's the source of life? Is it Monsanto's invention? Is it SLAB? There is a Supreme Court decision in the United States which actually says seed is a self-replicating machine invented by Monsanto, and even 20 years down the line, if you buy grain, it is still the self-replicating machine, and you can't grow it out. It's a very, very famous case of a farmer who had bought soya bean in an elevator and was sued by Monsanto, and he took the case all the way to Supreme Court, and this was the final decision. At the same time, in our courts, we were getting decisions that seed is not an invention and Monsanto doesn't have patents, and they were collecting royalties illegally. They had made the cotton price jump up to 80,000% more. And if you look at the epidemic of farmer suicides in India, We've lost more than 300,000 farmers since globalization. 84% of them are farmers who had got into debt for BT cotton. This book is published by Naraj, and I'm very, very happy and proud that our Commerce Minister, who's still working on these issues at the WTO, that indigenous knowledge cannot be pirated, and that there needs to be a bringing into a revision, which was a mandatory revision, which hasn't been done, still waiting, a revision based on what has been called in UNRIS the eco-social contract, a simple ontological fact that life is not a manufacture and an invention, and the human right that farmers have a right to save and exchange seeds. It's the only viable way to do affordable farming, and it's the only viable way to do farming in times of the vulnerability of climate change, because it's only evolutionary breeding by farmers that can keep up with the changes we are witnessing. There are claims that genetic engineering will give us climate resilient seeds. We've done a book, and in this book too, there's a very big section, as well as in Oneness, how so much of the claims of the new seeds is really seeds that farmers had already evolved, of salt tolerance, of flood tolerance, of drought tolerance, and all that's happening now is either just taking that seed and reading its genome and guessing which part of the genome contributes to what trait. So if I go to a seed bank, and all the seeds are in the collections of the CGIAR system, they're sitting in Svalbard in what's called the Doomsday Seed Vault, and with them is a passport data which tells you what trait the seed has, that it's a drought resistant. So I take 1,000 drought resistant seeds and I put them through a computer reading and find through an algorithm, and then do a guesswork which will be they literally say, which will be the 100 lottery ticket that will win me the possibility of a patent. And you patent. You've done nothing. You don't even know what the seed is, but you guess that this part of the genome is what's going to be the contributor. There are 1,500 patents on climate resilient seeds. Deregulation was a very, very important part of the making of the billionaires and the making of inequality. So a year after the WTO was formed, the first ministerial was in Singapore, and the first thing they did was remove all taxation on the IT industry. That's where Microsoft got so rich. If they were paying the taxes, they wouldn't have. And if they didn't have IPRs on software, they wouldn't have. Two simple facts is what made Gates come to the top. But deregulation isn't just deregulation, it is also simultaneously, as I have witnessed in my country, a making illegal of the daily lives of people. So when it came to the whole seed issue, the talk used to be, we have to find ways to make it illegal for farmers to save seeds. That was the problem. And intellectual property rights were supposed to be the tool. It's just that we built the movements and we changed the trajectory. But I have had to deal with the making illegal of our cold press oil mills at the village level in 1998 to dump soya oil. They just worked out an amazing new law. The local edible oil had to be banned because that poor villager with 2 bullocks and his little cold press mill, who deals in no cash, the community will bring oil seeds, you take out the oil cake is left for you as feed for your animals. It's an economy that's totally circular. Overnight banned on what grounds? That there's no lab and no chemists. And they even did it to Gandhi's Ghani. We call the cold press mills Ghani. Even did it to Gandhi's Ghani. And I had to go, I was invited to come and join a satyagraha. Satyagraha was Gandhi's word for the force of truth for non-cooperation. And we had to save Gandhi's Ghani through a non-cooperation action, saying, no, this is the purest oil in the world, and we will continue to run this mill, and we will not allow it to be closed. Making fractures where there shouldn't be fractures, and integrating what should not be integrated. The Glass-Steagall Act used to keep people's savings separate from the investment banks, and this was removed. Through the removal, the speculators managed to get hold of the pension funds, the savings, and everything else, and that's part of how the whole system exploded. And as Joel Kurtzman has said, in the financial economy is somewhere between 20 to 50 times. I think it is now about 100 to 200 times. It's much bigger than when he wrote it. Then the real economy is not the economy of trade but of speculation. Its commerce is in financial instrument, and while its ultra-high-tech infrastructure straddles the globe and moves several $1 trillion a day between the major and minor nodes of the network, it is largely unregulated. Few people realize money in its traditional sense has met its device. Few still have paused to reflect on its impact. Now, 2 years ago, exactly 2 years ago, cash in India was banned. The big notes, 500 and 1,000 rupees. 8 p.m. lecture, not by the central bank governor, by the prime minister. And in no time, by 12 o'clock, all our cash was illegal. Now, Indians live in economies of self-organized systems. And that means, that poor woman who's sweeping the streets at the end of her life might have saved 500,000 rupees to take it back to her village to build a house. Suddenly her life savings were illegal. We've had huge debates 2 years later, right now. This is the big political discussion taking place in India. This was a forced digitalization, and it was forced with not just our prime minister saying it, but behind him was a lot of thinking. A war on cash had been declared in a program, the USA, and even before this forced digitalization was imposed on India, Bill Gates and Microsoft had already made the programs to make it work. Just like they were already ready, in the midnight of July 1st, 2017, this new centralized taxation system was created which made Jeff Bezos the richest. I think if Gates had known it would work for Bezos, he might not have had a role in this. But the GST programs were already written before the announcement by the government of India. And in each of them, I did a very simple calculation, if 100 rupees is transacted 100 times, it stays 100 rupees, and it still commands the same amount of resources. But digitally, it shifts 100 times. Each time, the digital giants, the financial giants, have made the 2%, 6%, whatever is the percentage on the transaction. That's where the miracle, mysterious money is growing so fast. It's in this forced digitalization. And since it is not at all regulated, and there's no taxation, it's again the case of the ordinary person. In India, we did not have to do tax returns if your earning was less than 100,000 rupees. Now, even if it's not that much, you have to go through this digital program. Who can afford it? Nobody. So you've got to hire an auditor, but not a small tax return auditor, because not on paper. It's all on digital programs. And that means at every step, the escalation of cutting off and turning more and more into excluded citizens grows. When I started this journey, it began with the seed. It began with the issue of biotechnology. But now there's this new convergence of biotechnology, the digital technologies, and the financial technologies. And this new convergence means that the ordinary ways in which we used to organize as agriculture workers, as peasants, as women, we had sectoral organizing in silos. They built silos, we responded to the silos. Well, they've already broken their silos. They're one, the 5. Who will be 3 next year? We don't know. How do we shift? How do we organize in a different way? I think the first is we need to learn from the fact that this power is a very, very volatile power. It's a highly unstable power. I have described it as the extractive economy that extracted from the earth, that extracted from nature, that extracted from society and put it all on top. But when you take a pyramid and make it an inverted pyramid, it's a very unstable structure. And we are watching that instability just in the past 2 weeks. There's a farmer, he used to spray Roundup in the lawns of a school. His name is Johnson. He won a case against Monsanto Bayer. And even when they wanted an appeal, the case was not dismissed. And the case has been upheld. It's a California case. Johnson's case triggered 8,000 more cases. And in a day, Bayer had lost 30% of its capital value. Around the same time, and I think the two are linked, BlackRock, which had become 6.3 trillion, lost 30%. So since it's got no connection with real processes, real wealth, it's like a butterfly's wing. One cancer patient can make this come toppling down. We also know from every study that the climate crisis, the species extinction crisis, which is being called the sixth mass extinction, are so severe. The recent IPCC report has said 12 years to turn around for transformation. And the new Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecological Services has said 10 years to prevent massive land degradation, massive species extinction, and with the land degradation, the uncontrollable uprooting of people, which is also called the refugee crisis, which then has its own multiplier effects. So, knowing how wrong things are, that collapse is staring us in the eyes, every alternative becomes that much more powerful. Its relevance increases. I think there's a new moment for solidarity. Women organize separately, youth organize separately, peasants organize separately, consumers organize separately, the unemployed didn't organize. We have a new moment. Now, the same billionaires with the new tools are talking about, first they talk about artificial intelligence as an inevitable takeover and a superior substitution of human intelligence. I've written about this in Oneness versus the 1%. But they talk about 99% human beings being disposable. 99% disposable, and we'll need 1% to write the algorithms. Well, I think the 99% that have been declared potentially disposable are a whole new solidarity with those who work today and are trying to defend the right to work, the dignity of work, and minimum wages and everything else that goes with workers' rights. I think it is a beautiful moment to redefine the terms and categories around two constructions that are so false, that allow this mysterious wealth creation by money making itself. It's when capital was defined as being the creative force for wealth creation, and the earth was reduced to land as an inert input, and human beings with all their creativity, all their work, were reduced to labor as another inert input. And these two inert inputs were merely inputs to the magic of money making. I've called it the money machine. I think it is time to do a new social contract, recognizing that the earth is amazingly creative. She's not dead, she's not just raw material, she's alive. That's why she's called Gaia. And her amazing self-organized systems is what kept the earth's climate systems and the earth's temperatures within that level, which made our evolution as a species possible. And they keep saying women don't work. They do all the work. Society would be over if women didn't work. It's just like they say, oh, we've overcome nature. Well, if you'd overcome nature, you wouldn't have air to breathe, and you wouldn't have food to eat, or you wouldn't have water to drink. All of it eventually is coming from the earth. You might put it in plastic and then say produced by Coca-Cola, and it's the women of Plachimada who shut down a Coca-Cola plant. They say they're stealing our water. 1.5 million liters a day, and then leaving what remains toxic because of the reverse osmosis, etc., that's required. So youth and women and the earth and the peasants and the workers and the future, disposable. We can all rise in a new eco-social contract of rejuvenating and regenerating the earth, human society, and our communities, from the very local all the way to the planetary. I have called it, this new eco-social contract, Earth Democracy. I wrote it after the WTO meeting collapsed in Seattle in 1999. And we were repeatedly told, oh, the anti-globalizers know what they're against, they don't know what they're for. We said, we are not anti-globalizers first. We are for the earth, we are for democracy, we are for society, we are for dignity, we are for equality. We know what we are for. That's why we are against the processes that destroy what we love. And I could see how the economies are not just killing the earth, but they're killing people. They have become genocidal economies and ecocidal economies. And that's why we did a tribunal on Monsanto 2 years ago in The Hague on ecocide. And democracies, as you can see, have also been hijacked and been mutated from being of the people, by the people, for the people, into being of the corporations, for the corporations, by the corporations. But which corporations? Not all of them. But behind them, we'll call them the 1%, which is actually the 5%. You all must have noticed how this then mutates into a new fracturing of society, that a dividing economy must also create divisions in society. The divisions and hate we are seeing is as genetically engineered as the GMO. It's not a natural process. Just because people have different faiths, it's not given that they'll hate and kill each other. I have watched in my country. We watched it historically when the East India Company was challenged by the peasant movement of India, 1857, and they were thrown out. And then when the crown came back, they came out with this recognition that if the Hindus and Muslims are united, there's no place for us to rule. And so we have to divide them. And all the problems we see today, even around Kashmir, the partition, my mother became a refugee, are all results of that. It hasn't gone away. Indian politics is shaped by that. The hate politics is still shaped by that. And then you'll remember that joining of the information technology and the new robber barons, where Facebook took the communications of people and then selected from the communications on Facebook where you're just talking to your friend. Then they sold that data to Cambridge Analytica. And with its algorithms, Cambridge Analytica gave 4 hate messages to the president who's the president of the United States today for his election campaigning. The first was hate of women. The second was hate of blacks. The third was hate of Muslims. And the fourth was hate of migrants. And whom did they target? They targeted the vulnerable, the unemployed worker, the farmers. And that's why it's not an accident that those are the places where the new leadership is popular and continues to vote, including in the last election, the midterm election that's just taken place. But who was voting to create a whole new leadership? Look at the women. First time 2 indigenous women are there. First time 2 Muslim women are going to be in US Congress. 100 women. None of them professional politicians. All of them with a determination of transformation. And solidarity across all fractures of religion and color and race. We've done this work around the seed beginning in 1987. And beginning with the seed, we found through the seed we can address climate change. Don't have time, but I have a new book called Biodiversity, Agroecology and Regenerative Organic Agriculture, which is 3 decades of our work in regenerative agriculture based on biodiversity and its conservation. By conserving seed and intensifying biodiversity, we can grow 2 times the food that India needs, and this would work globally. The incomes of our farmers increase tenfold compared to the commodity growing, chemical using farmers. Tenfold. In terms of nutrition per acre, because we don't measure the yield per acre, we measure the nutrition per acre. We can get rid of all malnutrition. Both the malnutrition of the deprivation of food, which is half of India's children are stunted and wasted, but also the malnutrition of the rest of the food, which is deprived of trace elements, micronutrients, antioxidants, phytochemicals, which only diversity and organic food can produce. And that's the new sciences that are evolving, of the fact that producing food is not, plant is not a machine and fertilizers are not a fuel, but living systems are amazing, organized self-complexities, intelligent, to the level where 1 root of 1 barley plant has more neurological activity going on than our brains. And in our gut, the 100 trillion microbes, which is now called the gut microbiome, is now being called the second brain, is the most sophisticated neurological system. We're just starting to figure this out. Our ancient knowledge, Ayurveda, knew it. They always used to say the gut is the basis of health and the basis of disease. And we found that by doing something simple, like protecting biodiversity, farmers' rights, and doing our duty for the earth and caring for the earth, we can meet the SDG 1 to get rid of poverty, we can meet SDG 2 on zero hunger, we can meet SDG 3 on good health and well-being. And I do believe good health and good food is a fundamental right, unlike what ecological apartheid and nutritional apartheid is being created, that it's fine for the rich to have organic and natural, but the rest should be condemned to fake food, artificial food. And I am committed that the rest of my life I will not let that happen, because I think good food is really a necessity for all and a right for all. I'd like to conclude by sharing the conclusion of just 2 extracts from my 2 books, Earth Democracy and the new book. So I wrote in Earth Democracy, Earth Democracy connects us through the perennial renewal and regeneration of life, from our daily life to the life of the universe. A democracy is the universe story in our times, in different places. It pulsates with the limitless potential of an unfolding universe, even while it addresses the real threats to our survival as a species. It is hope in time of hopelessness. It brings forth peace in time of wars without end, and it encourages us to love life fiercely and passionately at a time when leaders and the media breed hatred and fear. And then from my new book, only as one earth community and one humanity, united in our diversities, can we hold ourselves together, step away from the precipice, and escape the destructive, ecocidal, genocidal rule of the 1%. We can turn around and walk to our freedom, to live free, think free, breathe free, eat free.